Hello YouTube world, my name is Serene and welcome to Staying Serene. Today we'll be sharing a serene Saturday on the 5 ways the devil influences you to be disobedient. Serene Saturdays are when I share faith-based, inspirational and encouraging messages. So let's get right into this video. Okay, so we all know that the devil uses many tactics to influence us to be disobedient, right? And disobedience is really when God has just called us to do something, He's made His will known to us, and we choose not to do so. Okay, and so this could be in the written word of God or just a specific call to action that God has given you. And there are just so many ways that we can be disobedient. So I want to be sharing with you the 5 ways the devil leads us into disobedience. The first way is through doubt. So the devil, he loves to plant little seeds of doubt into our minds that lead us into disobedience. He always wants us to question God and just place uncertainty around what God has called us to do. So we see that he did this with Eve in the Garden of Eden. So when God left the garden and it was just the snake, which was the devil's form at that time, the devil asked Eve, "Are you sure that you were not able to eat all the plants that are in the garden?" Basically questioning if Eve was able to eat of the tree of good and evil, which she was not, because God did say that they were unable to eat it. They could not. God commanded them not to eat it, but the devil, he spread his uncertainty, he spread his doubt around that and asked God, "Are you sure?" He asked Eve, "Are you sure that that's what God said? Are you sure that you can't eat that fruit? Are you sure He didn't say you can't eat every fruit in the garden?" And so he planted that seed, and that's what led Eve into disobedience, just putting uncertainty around that. So, where there's doubt, there is room for disobedience. So that's the first tactic he likes to use. He likes to throw in a little doubt, asking you, "Are you really sure? Is that what God really said to you?" And just make you more willing to disobey because you're not actually sure what God said. Number 2 is unqualified. The devil likes to remind us that we are unqualified to do what God has called you to do. So he'll be like, can you do that? Are you sure you can do that? You're not qualified enough. He might bring up a list of things you've never done before to show that, hey, you cannot do this if God has called you to a specific position or calling. Or he might just continue just being in your ear that you're not qualified enough to do this. You are not experienced enough to do this. You cannot do this, right? And so I see this during Moses and the burning bush. So when Moses was at the burning bush and God called him to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses said, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and plead for my people? Who am I to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt?" And even after God reassured him that he would be with him, Moses said that he was slow of speech and that he could not speak to Pharaoh. And this really angered God, and it really angered God, and God shouted back, "Who made man's mouth? Who made this? Who made that?" Really showing his ultimate power. But Moses, he felt unqualified enough to do what God had called him to do. And so that is what the devil likes to do. He likes to convince us that we're unqualified enough to do what God has called us to do. And the thing is that with God, even in our inadequacies, God can show off His glory. God can still be glorified in our inadequacies. The thing to remember when you're ever feeling unqualified to be obedient is that God is strong in our weakness. When we are weak, He is strong. So if you feel unqualified, that's okay, because God is able to still do wonderful things in your weakness. He's still able to prove Himself in your weakness. So trust Him and know that He is going to be strong if you're weak in that area. So trust God when He's called you to do something. The third way that he likes to lead us into disobedience is through fear. Fear is a really sneaky way to get people to be disobedient. Okay, fear is a natural emotion, but God hasn't given us the spirit of fear, as it says in 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So the devil actually likes to use fear as a medium to get us to be disobedient to God. He likes to sneak in that fears and just make you feel uneasy about doing what God has called you to do. And I see this when we go to Joshua and the spies in Numbers. Okay, so during this time, Moses sent the 12 spies out into the promised land to just spy it out, see what it was like, and to report back. And there was only 2, Joshua and Caleb, who returned with a good report about how blessed the land was, how it was flowing with milk and honey, and how the fruits were prosperous, and how they should just go in and conquer the land and do what God had called them to do. Basically encouraging the people to be obedient. But the other 10 spies, returned with a negative report saying that they could not conquer the land, they could not overcome it because the inhabitants were so big and so strong. So the 10 spies convinced the people that they were unable to do what God had called them to do because of the size of the inhabitants, that they could not overthrow them. So this caused the Israelites to all be afraid and to complain that they wanted to die because they were unable to conquer the land. And the thing about it is that God was with them, and God had already promised them this land. God had said that he would put it into their hands. All they had to do was obey. Because of their fear, the Israelites refused to do what God had called them to do. And because of this, they had to pay for their disobedience. Because they were disobedient to what God had called them to do, they actually were unable to go into the promised land. They were never able to go into it. For 40 years they wandered in the wilderness because of their disobedience, and their children were the ones who were able to inherit the promised land. They were the ones who were able to walk into it and to inhabit it. And so they paid a heavy price for their disobedience. So even when you're afraid, you have to pay the consequences for disobedience. So, you need to be able to be obedient even in the midst of fear, and just know that God has not given you fear. The fourth way is through discouragement. The devil loves to discourage us and to place challenges and situations in our lives to discourage us. Okay, he even might place certain people in our lives to discourage us, to put us down instead of lifting us up. And I see this in the story of David and Goliath, which is a very familiar story. I think everybody knows it. So when you look at before David arrived in the camp, Goliath was out there and he was mad. He was furious, and he kept on basically challenging the Israelites and mocking the God they served. And the Israelites, they saw Goliath's great stature. They saw his strength. He was 9 feet 9 inches, and they were afraid and they were dismayed. They were discouraged by his appearance, and they thought they could not do it because of his great size, his great appearance, his demeanor. They didn't think that they could conquer him. So they were all afraid. They were all too discouraged to even try to defend their God by defeating Goliath. So discouragement really leads you to disobedience. It leads you to not want to do what God has called you to do, in this case, which was to defend God by defeating this Philistine. But fortunately for us, David entered the picture, and he was not discouraged by Goliath's appearance. He was not discouraged by how tall and big and strong he was. No, David actually, I think, was more empowered. And so he actually was able to defeat the Philistine Goliath because he was not discouraged and he trusted and obeyed God. So it's actually up to us if we allow ourselves to be discouraged. Sometimes if we allow ourselves to be discouraged. The devil likes to use discouragement to disobey him, but what if we just didn't allow it to, So I just want to encourage you just not to allow discouragement to make you disobedient. You may feel this emotion, but just don't dwell on it, and just don't get stuck on it and feel like you cannot do what God has called you to do because you are discouraged. The fifth and final way the devil tries to lead us into disobedience is through rejection. Okay? And rejection can be in just like a snide comment or remark, or that someone is rejecting us because you're being obedient to God. So when you're being obedient to God, there's always a chance that you can be rejected by people. Okay, and when I think about the biblical example of this, I am immediately reminded of Jesus and his disciples who were rejected. In fact, Jesus was rejected in his hometown, the place that he came from. He went there doing what God had called him to do, preaching, doing miracles, and doing what God had called him to do. But when he went into his homeland of Nazareth, none of them believed, and they were all, talking to him, and they were like, isn't that Mary's son? Isn't that we know his brothers and sisters, they're with us. What is he doing? How is he a preacher? They were so astonished, and they rejected him. They rejected him because they were familiar with him. And even the disciples were rejected when they went to certain towns and cities. And so rejection is something we're all going to face, but we should not allow it to make us disobedient. So we're going to face rejection, but we should not allow it to make us disobedient. Like Jesus and his disciples, we need to continue on being faithful and obedient to God even in the face of rejection. So those are the 5 ways the devil tries to lead us into disobedience. And I just really hope that you really internalize this message, that you really think about it, and you try to identify if something happens in your life and you want to be obedient, but there's so many voices in your head telling you that you're not enough, that you're not qualified enough, that you are, all these things just rolling in rolling in your mind with doubt and fears and discouragement and rejection, all these things. And I hope that now you have the tools to identify them for what they are, to identify the devil's lies, and that you are able to fight it with the truth. So I hope this video helped you and encouraged you and just give you something to meditate on. And I hope the next time that you have to be obedient to God, that you are more ready to do that, because now you know the ways the devil tries to make you disobedient, and now you can fight it with God's help. I also do have an Instagram account at Staying Serene, where you could find faith-based inspirational quotes that I create myself. So I really would appreciate if you went on that page. It's really good, and I do my best to just give you constant encouragement and inspiration. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Okay, bye!